If it were easy and convenient, everybody would do it. And the reason it's not easy is because when you start mixing crops, it makes it very difficult to harvest them because now you've got two different harvest windows. Now you can't run a single harvester down through, and even planting at different times. The seeds are different sizes, uh, different kind of calibration of equipment. It takes way more management, and and intercropping is much more conducive to hand harvest than mechanical harvest. When you're when you're mechanically running over something, you want as much homogeneity as possible, not heterogeneity.
Hi, welcome to Beyond Labels. I'm Dr. Stina McCullough, and I am here with our favorite farmer, Joel Salatin. And today, I think this is going to be a fascinating topic. Joel's going to do most of the speaking. I wanted to introduce this, kick it off, because I found what I think is a really interesting article. It was posted in Zero Hedge, and this is what it says. From ancient Egypt to medieval England, cultivating one or more crops in the same field was common practice among many farmers for thousands of years. But in the last century, food producers largely stopped intercropping and moved toward an industrial type of agriculture, a shift that contributed to 34% of the world's farmland being degraded today. Okay, so now what they're saying is there's been a new interest in what they're calling intercropping, right? Basically cultivating more than one crop in the same field, so mixing crops. And they're saying that farmers are starting to understand that it improves soil health, it decreased costs. And as we know from research we've done on this show in the past, Joel, it also usually increases nutrient density of those foods and biodiversity of the microbes when you intercrop. So what they're reporting on is that there's a new project in the EU. It's called Leguminos. And researchers are starting to study the benefits of intercropping in 8 different European countries, as well as in Egypt and Pakistan. They have 180 what they're calling living labs, where farmers who are farming by a monoculture system are going to introduce one strip of intercropped cereals and legumes. So like a wheat paired with a pea or a barley, with beans. They already have results from one of the UK's living labs, and the test farm that planted wheat and beans. They reported a 27% increase in the intercropped plot compared with the monoculture strip of the same farm, right? So this is on the same farm. They got a 20% increase. I'm assuming that means in yield. They also had less weeds reported. A preliminary analysis of the soil showed less plant disease present, meaning less need to buy and use agricultural chemicals. There was another test plot that tested wheat intercropped with clover, and they said it completely removed the presence of a parasitic weed called dodder. So I want to jump into this because this is really interesting. I'm really hoping that this catches on, right? And that's the purpose of this study. They're actually showing to have good test results, and they're trying to convince more farmers to farm this way by, farming by intercropping as opposed to monocropping, like we do predominantly here in the US as well. And also hoping that consumers become educated about how their fruits and vegetables are actually grown, and maybe exercise the power of their dollar, right, to try to help shift the market. So, but my first question, Joel, for you is, if the crop mixing is beneficial to farmers, right, and beneficial to consumers based on nutrient, more dense nutrients profile and more robust microbiome of those foods, why did industrial agriculture basically wipe it out? Like, for the most part, what allowed that to happen?
Yeah, well, it's of course a great question, Sina, and the reason is because this isn't easy. If it were easy and convenient, everybody would do it. And the reason it's not easy is because when you start mixing crops, it makes it very difficult to harvest them because now you've got two different harvest windows. Now you can't run a single harvester down through, and even planting at different times. The seeds are different sizes, uh, different kind of calibration of equipment. It takes way more management, and and intercropping is much more conducive to hand harvest than mechanical harvest. When you're when you're mechanically running over something, you want as much homogeneity as homogeneity as possible, not heterogeneity. And so my first reaction when you sent this article to me and I read through it was, well, boy, you talk about Back to the Future. I mean, the indigenous American farming, the Three Sisters, the Three Sisters garden of corn, beans, and squash was the ultimate, intercropping, you know, um, leguminose kind of a system. And that was done, for centuries prior to European arrival here in the Americas. And so the reason that we went away from that kind of thing is because the the planting of those three things is almost impossible with machines. And if you plant them all at the same time, the corn plant might not be big enough to trellis up the beans. So you have to plant the beans 2 weeks behind the corn, so the corn can get up about a foot before you plant the beans. Otherwise, the corn isn't a strong enough trellis, and the beans actually overwhelm the corn. Well, you can't go down with a machine and plant beans 2 weeks after you planted the corn without tearing up the corn. It's very, very difficult, very, very tedious. And so the monocropping was the pillar of the four pillars of industrialism are mechanization, routinization, simplification, and specialization. Those four things: mechanization, routinization, specialization, and simplification. And so everything in the industrial agriculture sector is all about making it more routine, more simple, more specialized, so that you can mechanically move through. All those four pillars come to bear in a monocrop situation. And so the intercropping just takes a lot more management, often, far more conducive to handwork, and not nearly as conducive to mechanical work. So that's why we went to the monocrop, and so the whole idea of the intercropping is is fraught with logistical and practical problems on a mechanic on an industrial mechanical scale.
Okay. Yeah. And I read this fascinating article over the weekend. This is from Science in 2022. It's titled "The Ancient Grain Sowing Method Could Be Farming's Future." And this will piggyback on what you're saying. They're talking about how in Ethiopia, it's one of the few places in the world where farmers still grow maslins. I think I'm saying that right. That term for growing different varieties and species of grains in the same field, right? Intercropping with grains. Mm-hmm. And they're saying that that the Ethiopian farmers feel pressured to grow modern monocultural crops. And this is in large part because you need uniformity, like what you're talking about. They said the global market wants a certain type of wheat for their Wonder Bread, a mixture of 3 varieties of wheat and 4 varieties of barley with some other things thrown in really doesn't make the cut. That basically there is this consumer demand that we want it all uniform, right? And we talked about this previously with produce, with fruits and vegetables. And part of the reason why there's a coating, often a wax coating on it, is because we want it to look a certain way, right? So that was a man-made problem. So they're saying that there is this demand that you want everything to have like a uniform taste. So when you intercrop, for instance, with the grain, the bread that you make from it or the beer that you make from it might have a little different flavor to it, right? Based on whatever was intercropped and what survived. And that we are wanting, the consumers are demanding basically a mono taste, right? If you will, a monocrop giving you this mono taste.
Yeah. Listen, imagine if the average person getting a loaf of bread got, one loaf had brown speckles in it and another one had black speckles in it. One tasted a little more like rye, one tasted a little more like barley. I mean, people would go crazy. We live, I mean, just think about what happens in a franchise. I'll just give you a personal story. Years ago, we we had a friend who introduced us to Cracker Barrel, the restaurant chain Cracker Barrel. And what he did, he was buying our eggs, and he would take them into Cracker Barrel and order breakfast and give the attendant, the waitress, the eggs, and say, I want two sunny side up eggs, but I want you to cook these for me. And one time he did that, and the cook came running back in from the kitchen to see this guy and said, "Where did you get these eggs? I've never seen eggs like this." And so he told him, and the next thing, within like 2 or 3 weeks, here I'm talking to the vice president of new product marketing at Cracker Barrel headquarters in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And she was interested in what we were doing with the pastured eggs and all this stuff. And so she was actually very, very interested. And so, my vision was, okay, so there's, at that time, I think there was 187 Cracker Barrels. And my vision, and each one of them, get this, each one of them used 600 dozen eggs. I'm sorry. 600 dozen eggs a week. So think about that. 600 dozen eggs a week. And I mean, that's almost enough to support a small farmer on a 10 or 12 acre place. And so my vision was, okay, so I get 187 small farms, all within like 5 to 10 miles of Cracker Barrels, and and we supply the eggs. And so anyway, she asked me, so if we want to do this, how long would it take you to to supply us? Oh, and of course she was thinking we would supply all the eggs to Cracker Barrel, from Polyface. No. That wasn't my idea. Was we have 187 farms supplying 187 Cracker Barrels, and anyway, I told her, well, we got to buy the chickens. We've got to. I mean, it would be several years before I could get such a network going. So and quickly she just cut me off. She said, well, forget it. We can't do it because there's nothing that makes people angrier in a chain or a franchise situation than having something taste different or look different or be able to get something different in one and not be able to get it in another one. Mm-hmm. And so we have completely commodified and uniformed not only our food system but even our personal expectations in our culture, where we don't appreciate different, we appreciate same. Nobody wants to go to McDonald's and have a burger taste different in one than it tastes in another one. And so this whole thing goes hand in hand. This uniformity, I mean, that was the perfect word. Uniformity is the foundation of commodification, because you don't want one bushel of corn to be different than another bushel of corn. You don't want one bushel of wheat to be different than another bushel of wheat. You want uniformity, because otherwise you can't call it yellow dent corn number 5. You can't call it, wheat number 3. And of course the commodity traders, they don't want variety, because every time you have variety, you got to have a different silo to store it in. Well, we don't want to have a different silo. We want to all store it in one silo. We want to make one great big silo, so it's all one great, great big thing. We don't want differentiation. And when GMOs first came in, genetically modified organisms, I went to the feed mill that I'd been using. I said, hey, I want to get GMO free, and boy, they wouldn't even give me the time of day. They didn't want to complicate their life with other storage bins, to separate one product from another. And so uniformity is absolutely the key throughout the system, even I would suggest to the American food expectation. We want that item to be exactly the same in one place as well as another. And so, we've kind of done it to ourselves. We've fallen in, and then when one of our favorite topics is the food labeling. If you veer from a label at all, then suddenly your label is illegal, and now you can't have that product because it's actually not that, it's this. And so the labeling laws go right into this as well.
Yeah.
So
even if it's healthier, right?
Right.
Even if it's healthier.
Even if it's healthier. And I remember one restaurant we were in, and or tried to get in, and the chef wouldn't he wouldn't look at our eggs. He tasted our eggs. He says, wow, these have a taste. He said, and he looked at me and said, nah, we don't want these. Our customers don't want eggs with taste. They just want bland. They just want bland. Yeah. And a lot of the the doctoring up that we do with American food now, with all of our sauces and barbecue and all this stuff, is because our food is so bland, it doesn't have any taste. And one of the funnest things we do here, at the farm is we cook stuff, pork and chicken and different things, with no salt, nothing. Serve it. People say, what'd you put on? No, we didn't put anything on it. What you're tasting is all that diversity of feedstock coming into it, the salad bar and all that stuff. I'll get down that rabbit hole. But the intercropping, or the leguminose, as they're calling this, you got to put a fancy scientific name on it. All of that absolutely is exactly what ecology wants. It's what pollinators want. It's what soil cover wants. It's everything proper ecologically. It's just really hard, as you find out, when you have an industrial system. An industrial system does not sit well on top of an ecological system.
Thank you for joining us on Beyond Labels. Our mission with this podcast is to make it accessible to everyone.
But we are behind a paywall, because the issues we discuss are often subject to censorship. We've run into that, and so we have an extremely modest paywall to let us have the freedom to discuss the kind of issues we want to discuss in the way we want to discuss them. And you can become a member and enjoy all this content by clicking on the description box below. We look forward to having you join our family.